A wealthy CEO laughed at a father's pile of scrap metal, never realizing that deep belief beats money every single time. The morning Giselle looked at Wyatt's dusty yard, she just laughed. Not politely and definitely not quietly. It was the smug sneer of someone who thought millions of dollars made her completely untouchable. The world only sees mismatched tires and raw steel, overlooking the soul of what is actually being built. His 5-year-old daughter stood close by, clutching a toy rabbit. Giselle ran Vantech Motorsport. She bought expensive, elite race cars and dominated championships for 3 straight years. She hired the precious minds money could buy, totally blind to the power of a father's quiet dedication. This rusty heap in the dirt was destined to leave her expensive engineering in the dust. Stick with me here, because what Wyatt forged in that yard took 3 long years of belief to finally silence the entire world. He got by on a quiet, disciplined daily routine. Every single morning at 5:45, long before dawn, he walked downstairs in the dark and brewed 2 hot cups of coffee. It was a habit he kept since the painful week his wife passed away, and he never could explain why he kept pouring that second mug long after losing her. He would sip his own warm coffee, leave the other by her picture, then just stand by the window, staring out at the shrouded frame waiting in the cold yard. The cheap tarp was faded and worn. Frayed straps barely held the cover tight against the wind. But under that cheap cover, the chassis sat waiting, holding the slow and steady progress he had carved out late the previous night. This was a raw, working-class neighborhood on the dusty outskirts of Phoenix. Open yards with simple wire fences. A place where people work with their hands and leave their garages wide open. No one around here questioned the massive project taking shape outside. Isaac, the local mechanic who carried 30 hard years of grease ground deep under his fingernails, watched that chassis grow month after month. He respected the silent dedication, recognizing a true builder when he saw one. You see, Wyatt once designed top-tier cars for Vantech. He spent 4 exhausting years there before they pushed him out. But that was just the clean corporate lie meant to hide the ugly truth. In truth, Wyatt had spent 11 grueling months developing a revolutionary blueprint for a cooling system that relied on natural heat flow rather than heavy, complex pumps. Lighter, much simpler. It was far more reliable under pressure than anything Vantech's high-paid teams had ever designed. He sent it up the chain only to receive a cold, generic email in return. They dismissed his genius, promising to look at it during some future cycle. 6 weeks later, Cameron walked into the boardroom and presented Wyatt's brilliant work as his own. Not long after that stab in the back, Wyatt was dragged into an office and coldly fired over fake performance issues that were completely fabricated. It was a flimsy excuse, just standard corporate greed protecting the thieves who stole his dream. He packed his boxes and drove home. He sat in his truck for hours, staring blankly before he could face his family. His wife was still alive then. She held him tightly at the door in complete silence, knowing that some unfair battles don't need immediate words. We both know some losses just need to be felt before you start over. I didn't steal a single Vantech blueprint when I walked away. I didn't need to. Every single inch of that homemade build already lived right inside my head. We both know what happens when a dream settles deep inside your bones. When you believe in a scrap build this long, obsession turns into pure understanding. In the 2 years since my Grace passed away, that backyard project became my therapy, shaping grief into steel, wire, and reclaimed scrapyard parts. My little Arya grew up watching it all unfold. She was only 5 now, old enough to decide which rusty tools made the coolest noises, and how that junk frame belonged together. She even named her stuffed toy rabbit Gravel. When I asked her why, she thought about it with that intense kid seriousness, then declared that gravel always gets stuck under the wheels. People ignore the dirt, but once those tires roll over it, it flies fast and far. I just stared at my kid for a second, much longer than I meant to, before diving right back into my mechanical grind. The Phoenix Desert Classic registration email finally hit my inbox on Thursday. Picture this brutal endurance event, 200 kilometers of rugged mixed terrain just outside the city. No commercial division rules at all. $5 million in cash to the first racing machine crossing that finish line. I scanned the rules 3 times, dialed Isaac, and kept my mouth completely shut. That flashy automotive exhibition hit the downtown convention center every single spring. And Isaac convinced me to haul my bare scrap frame there, completely unfinished. I still faced months of brutal work, but the bones showed real engineering, and I hoped someone would believe in my build enough to sponsor parts for an entry. During registration, I booked the absolute cheapest, smallest square footage tucked in the back. I backed my rusty trailer in. I tossed up a basic cardboard sign listing my homemade car's specs on one printed page. No corporate banners, no pit crew in matching million-dollar team shirts either. What I had was pure grit and the patience to share my belief in this underdog build with anyone who'd listen. A few actually did. A retired fabrication engineer spent 40 minutes grilling me on the technical magic behind my clever convection channels. And right before he walked away, he promised to donate 2 spare pieces of aluminum tubing just collecting dust in his garage. An off-road parts supplier even snapped a quick photo of my genius suspension geometry. But let me tell you, that wasn't the highlight. What tested my belief that morning was Giselle. She swaggered in with 5 lackeys, Cameron hovering right at her polished shoulder, strutting through that exhibition floor like elite billionaires who expect the world to part for them. The massive Vantech Motorsports booth completely dominated one giant corner, flaunting their brand-new million-dollar competition machine. Propped up on a carbon fiber stage, glowing with the kind of smug polish that takes a full day to shine and costs more than my entire life savings to maintain. Giselle wore a sharp dark jacket, walking with the totally arrogant, practiced efficiency of a CEO who does this constantly, completely unimpressed by everyday garage mechanics like me. She just scanned the floor, never lingering. Exactly how the rich skim a room, looking for quick wins while ignoring the power of long-term belief. Cameron leaned in, whispering a smug joke while nodding toward the far wall. She followed his arrogant, wealthy gaze. There sat Wyatt's race car, just a bare frame, welds, and mismatched wheels. You and I know that real belief starts in a quiet garage like this. She also spotted young Arya sitting on a cheap folding chair, holding her pet rabbit, quietly watching the wealthy crowd with patient, wise eyes. The rich executive turned back, saying absolutely nothing at first. Then her loud voice cut through, demanding to know who allowed this hand-built scrap into her expensive show. Heads turned immediately. People began to whisper. The dedicated mechanic stood up from his engine, his face calm, with absolute unbothered confidence. He spoke in his usual steady, patient, and completely unhurried way, explaining how asymmetric thermal diffusion worked right inside his custom engine housing, and how smart, natural convection cooling completely stripped away the need for expensive pumps. He calculated the projected friction drop over high heat would beat those million-dollar corporate machines by 17%. She let him finish, smirking arrogantly that his hand-built dream only belonged in a local salvage yard. With that, she turned and marched back to her corporate display, her expensive entourage trailing closely behind. Cameron stayed behind for a brief second at the edge of the crowd. He stared at the hand-built car with a look that wasn't quite mockery. It was nervous insecurity, the quiet fear of a man who knows money cannot buy soul. The rest of the crowd quickly drifted back to their shallow conversations. A few laughed nervously, not out of malice, but because raw, quiet dedication makes comfortable people uneasy. Little Arya had heard every single word. She looked up at her father, silently watching his face to see how he'd react. Wyatt knelt down to her level, gently asking if her little rabbit Gravel felt too small here. She shook her head. He smiled, saying that was perfect. Isaac stood in the back, clutching his phone. He didn't put the device down for a very long time. Late that night, in his quiet sanctuary, Wyatt opened his design binder directly to the valve schematic. He circled a bold modification he'd been patiently weighing for 3 weeks. He jotted down the extra hours needed, mapping out the long road ahead. He didn't waste a single second dwelling on the wealthy crowd's insults. If he did, you and I both know how true builders handle obstacles. He took whatever detail was actually useful, applied it directly to his work, and completely ignored the shallow noise. And their opinions in this case meant absolutely nothing. He simply added 15 hours to his schedule and kept grinding away. The only real obstacle left in his way was money. But Wyatt tackled that just like any engineering problem, by calculating exactly how huge it was. and then figuring out, block by block, how to crush it. He needed $8,000 more for the custom cooling shrouds and aerodynamic bodywork. So he eagerly took on extra shifts at the local garage. He spent weekends consulting for amateur racing crews, diagnosing complex engine issues for spare cash. And he slashed his own living expenses to the bone, leaving absolutely 0 pennies unaccounted for. Isaac chipped in with spare materials from his shop, but never cash. Let's be real, a true believer refuses charity but happily accepts parts hoarded for decades. You and I know why a real mechanic saves old junk, because scrap always finds a way to prove its worth again. When little Arya asked if they were poor, Wyatt just told her they were being careful. And to a kid, that explanation made perfect sense. This entire backyard racer relied on just 2 basic rules. Rules he spent years carving out of the dirt, failing, fixing, and believing in it until it worked. First rule: when you run a brutal desert endurance race, the machine that actually survives always beats the shiny exotic toy leading those first few miles. Overheating always knocked out the wealthy teams first at the legendary Phoenix Classic. Just brutal, endless, high-speed hammering. Extreme power and heat pushing past 40 degrees on the track. The blistering surface roasted standard cooling, punishing every tiny flaw in those million-dollar corporate toys. But Wyatt's clever convection design did not even need a water pump. No delicate computers. And no complex backups, because he designed it with 0 points of failure. Engine heat simply flowed through custom channels carved right into the engine block. It drew heat from the core, bleeding it straight through the car's metal frame. It was lighter, simpler, and out here, the Phoenix Classic proved his long-term belief was bulletproof. His second secret weapon was a basic wind deflector mounted on the roof. Completely mechanical, not a single fancy sensor in sight. Controlled entirely by natural shifts in air pressure. It adjusted itself, cutting drag far better than the rigid wings of those wealthy corporate teams. Wyatt learned this brilliant design trick from an old-timer who spent 40 years crafting dirt track racers in the old days before computers made years of hands-on belief seem completely obsolete. The design was not flashy or complex, it was just honest work. Meanwhile, let's watch Cameron build his empire. They just poured millions into their race program, pushing their high-tech development into absolute overdrive. Their multi-million-dollar machine was known as the Vone. With Cameron driving, the wealthy team ran dual electric cooling setups. A high-strung engine tuned to dump maximum power in the first 100 kilometers. And a body designed in a $1 million wind tunnel. They felt untouchable. Cameron scanned the entry list and spotted the Underdog's name. The executive searched public records for the home-built car's specs listed as G00, but found nothing. And that quiet terrified him. He knew enough about engineering to understand that hiding specs on a budget build was not proof that this man's long-term project was just a joke. He had learned that lesson years ago. By stealing genius from someone else, before they had the money or power to protect it. Just 3 weeks remained before the deadline. They towed the home-built racer out to an empty highway at 2 in the morning. No cameras, no wealthy sponsors, and absolutely no paper trail. The backyard dream fired up, imperfect. The wheel vibrated at high speed, a small flaw he quietly noted down to fix before race week. But believe me, that engine roared for 40 straight minutes. She ran hot and hard without a single warning light. They finally pulled over, letting the hand-built machine idle quietly. Isaac slowly circled the custom machine with his light. He stepped back and tapped the warm, hand-beaten hood twice. You and I know that quiet tap meant everything. The dream was finally real. 2 weeks later, a quiet evening settled in. Arya's fever spiked that night. Wyatt immediately dragged his sleeping bag onto her floor, refusing to leave her side until the heat finally broke. For 2 days, his workshop sat completely dark and ignored. A missed race didn't matter. What he built at home came first. By morning, her fever was gone, and she asked for juice. But her very next question, she wanted to know if their race car was still parked outside. Wyatt promised her both he and the car were staying right there. Those 2 promises were exactly what she needed to hear. That Tuesday, a wealthy client named Giselle brought her expensive factory-perfect car in for a basic oil change, brake inspection, and a quick tire rotation. Her assistant booked the appointment. She never even glanced at the shop's name. Yet she couldn't ignore Wyatt as he walked out, a quiet craftsman standing in the bright glare of the service bay. She waited in silence. Neither of them mentioned the upcoming racing exhibition. Wyatt worked with practiced efficiency, returning her keys in under an hour. But when she stepped up to the front desk to pay, her eyes drifted to his workbench, where a single photo was pinned. A dark-haired woman laughing, her face shining with a pure, genuine smile. Giselle asked if it was his wife. Wyatt softly replied she had passed. A deep, heavy silence immediately settled over the small garage. Giselle walked out without saying another word. She left a tip that doubled her bill, leaving with absolutely no explanation. Wyatt stared at the massive tip on the receipt long after she finally drove off. Then the corporate CEO Cameron showed up with absolutely no warning. He parked his luxury vehicle right outside. He walked in with the arrogant confidence of a man who believes every single thing on earth has a price tag. Looking Wyatt dead in the eye, he offered $25,000. All to buy Wyatt's custom cooling plans and eliminate him from the upcoming race. He pitched it as a perfectly logical, common-sense business transaction. It is the exact kind of desperate buyout we see when wealth faces real passion. Wyatt just stared back at him in absolute silence. His silence stretched so long that the nervous executive rushed to fill it. Then Wyatt quietly observed that a millionaire was paying $25,000 just to avoid losing to a scrap car. He warned that one of them was deeply mistaken, and Cameron should figure out who. Cameron stormed out completely empty-handed, no designs, no race withdrawal. The wealthy executive sat fuming in his luxury car before speeding off. Hannah had spent 3 years reporting on the Phoenix Classic. She had an eye for finding those passionate underdog stories that corporate media completely ignored. The big networks only cared about the massively funded teams, chasing corporate dollars and famous family names. But you and I know the real magic is always found at the very bottom, where relentless mechanics with huge homemade dreams were quietly getting ready to fight. That was where she found Wyatt, no sponsors, just pure belief. Just a handwritten name scribbled on an official racing sheet. And she tracked down his backyard garage. She introduced herself straight up, sharing her Underdog racing story. Her questions cut deeper than the usual shallow racing news. She actually cared about his backyard build, not just chasing some cheap headline before race day. Still, the quiet mechanic guarded his words closely. No mention of corporate millions or the thief who stole it. When asked why he left that high-paying engineering job, he said he never actually stopped building. She wrote it down without pushing, earning a little trust from him. Isaac had spent 2 years quietly keeping records, a practical man preparing for the long game. Because folks who survive corporate greed learn to keep receipts without ever being told to. Like a seasoned builder measuring twice before making his final cut. It is just how you survive in this world. Inside were photos of original blueprints taken on a kitchen table weeks before the suits ever saw them. Hard proof stamped deep in the metadata. He also included a side-by-side comparison he made himself. Handwritten notes breaking down every blueprint. Matched against the shiny patent corporate filed 6 months after kicking the real creator out. Isaac handed this evidence over completely behind the mechanic's back, slipping it to her on Saturday while Wyatt was busy at his daughter's school. Hannah read through everything, but quietly held her fire for now. You and I know timing is everything. The facts were there, but the perfect moment to strike had not arrived. Now fast forward to race week. Up in her luxury suite, Giselle skimmed the entry list, her standard corporate ritual. Just like she had done for every race since buying out the major team. Her assistant handed her the clean printouts. She scrolled past the million-dollar rosters until she hit the absolute bottom of the sheet. No corporate sponsors, no deep pockets, just a backyard scrap build called Gravel. She froze. That name triggered an old memory. A little kid holding a toy rabbit, a grease-stained binder on a cluttered workbench. She called Cameron in instantly, demanding to know who this mechanic actually was. The corporate golden boy hesitated just a bit too long. Normally, a tiny delay like that means nothing. But when the corporate boss asks about a scrappy nobody threatening their millions, hesitation screams guilt. Giselle noticed the slip-up but kept completely quiet all night. The second he left, she opened her laptop, staying up late searching through files that had nothing to do with actual track strategy. Meanwhile, the single father ran his final checks by the dim beam of a flashlight, checking the cheap oil, the tires, and tightening every old backyard suspension bolt, slowly circling the welded scrap metal, praying nothing rattled loose on the trailer ride. His little girl sat on the porch in pajamas, holding her toy rabbit, watching her hero work. She asked if he was scared. He nodded, so she asked why he was racing. He smiled, reminding her of what her mother always believed. The only thing worse than losing to million-dollar machines is never firing up your engine. And honestly, you and I know that little girl took those words deep into her heart. She promised to hold her stuffed rabbit, Gravel, tight once the engines roared. He smiled, telling her that would absolutely help. By 9 in the morning, the heat had already reached 41 degrees. The desert grid was packed with 27 cars across 5 rows, but the real contrast? You see, it was a battle of money versus belief, a lesson no glossy program could teach. The expensive corporate car took the pole, shining with flashy branding. A team of 7 mechanics swarmed it in matching, high-tech gear. Meanwhile, Isaac had towed in the trailer carrying Wyatt's handmade car at 5 a.m., and parking quietly on the outside edge, completely ignored by everyone. Their home-built machine had 0 sponsors. No slick decals, just a hand-drawn number on a cheap whiteboard, zip-tied right to the driver door. The whiteboard read G00. From the luxury suites, Giselle looked down, getting a perfect view of the starting lineup. Her eyes locked onto Wyatt's backyard creation in the outer lane. Ignoring the wealthy executives around her, she watched his quiet work of love in absolute silence. Down in the dusty stands, Isaac walked with young Arya. They found spots right up against the rail, offering a front-row view of the entire battle. He sat back with his coffee, radiating that steady patience that had anchored Wyatt through 3 long years of building and believing in the garage. Arya propped her toy rabbit on the metal armrest, aiming it so the toy could watch her father race. Then the green flag dropped. Vaughn launched forward with expensive corporate power, his machine built only to dominate those early 40 kilometers. A massive engine built for easy straightaways and aerodynamics tailored for flat open dirt. Over $200,000 of tech aimed straight ahead. Cameron pushed his vehicle hard, driving with his usual early race aggression. It was pure, arrogant pride, the blind confidence of a wealthy man who never had to doubt his expensive toy. Meanwhile, Wyatt fell back to 9th place after Sector 1. But he fully expected to trail on the open flats. His custom low-budget cooling setup gave him no edge on a smooth, fast run. It wasn't built for that. The real genius of his homemade machine required a test we hadn't hit yet: vicious, unrelenting heat. The absolute destruction that 200 kilometers of brutal desert deals to fragile, expensive cars never built to survive. So he held 9th, keeping a close eye on the temperature gauge on his handmade dashboard. And the reading stayed right where his late-night garage math predicted. By kilometer 43, wealthy teams had already broken down. 2 overheated engines and a snapped suspension on the rough rocks starting stage 2. The outdoor temperature had climbed to 43 degrees. The desert ground was boiling, reflecting intense heat back up into those fragile, expensive machines. Cameron's high-tech dashboard flashed a heat warning at kilometer 47. No major alarm yet. Just a quiet warning. A warning designed to let a driver back off before the entire engine melted down. He slowed his pace by 15%, still easily holding the front. Now watch this. Wyatt quietly rolled past 2 broken-down racers, climbing into 7th place. Hannah waited at the 60-kilometer mark, holding a heavy zoom lens and her notes. She took shots of Wyatt's humble garage build roaring past. She'd later write that his stable exhaust temperature seemed impossible for a backyard car running with the leaders. That homemade build ran incredibly cool. Everyone expected that scrap engine to melt, but years of careful building let it survive heat that would kill any factory car. Halfway through the 50-kilometer stage, the dirt turned into brutal, jagged, broken rock. Tight squeezes and dangerous drops. You and I know this: rough dirt levels everything, stripping away expensive speed and forcing drivers to rely on pure precision. Wyatt knew this track intimately. He studied every satellite map and scouted the path in his old truck 3 months ago. stopping his old truck to walk those punishing sections on his own 2 feet. He knew exactly where it squeezed tight. He spotted the deceptive fast lines and found tricky, slow curves he could take wide open without hitting his brakes once. His garage build climbed from 7th to 5th here without making a single direct pass. 2 expensive rigs suffered total engine failure, and Wyatt cruised right past where those million-dollar machines had died. The cheap car's temperature gauge stayed frozen. Meanwhile, at kilometer 90, the corporate boss was desperately fighting his hot engine over the radio with his crew, forcing himself to back off, fighting to survive engine limits that shrank with every mile. The corporate boss still led, but his arrogant, untouchable confidence was completely gone now. Up top, Giselle ditched the luxury suite and marched down to the timing screens as the 90-kilometer update hit. She did not say a single word to the smug corporate crowd she had been standing with. She just stared at the screen, watching those impossible race updates roll in. The homemade garage build hit 4th place at kilometer 90, 3rd place by kilometer 103, right after another wealthy team's machine lost fuel pressure and died on the dirt track. He snatched 2nd at kilometer 120 when the next massive corporate machine blew a tire on jagged rock. A rough crossing the single dad cleared flat out, relying entirely on the perfect line he found while walking that canyon months ago. The timing screen flashed again. Giselle stood totally frozen before it, arms stiff at her sides, not uttering a single word to the crowd. Then the corporate boss heard his radio. His crew warned him the home-built car held 2nd at kilometer 122. It was closing in so fast their race computers were throwing red flags. He demanded the gap 4 seconds. He was completely shocked, unable to ask anything else. Think about it. He finally realized the sheer power of a garage-built machine catching up to him. A scrap car he tried to block was now sitting just 4 seconds behind deep in this 200-kilometer race. Panicked, he pushed harder, and his expensive engine's heat alarms instantly flared up. His high-end cooling pump screamed at maximum. The gap froze, then fell to 3 seconds, then 2.5. Then the desert walls closed in at the track's absolute narrowest choke point. Official maps warned this was a punishing, single-lane corridor cutting through 200 meters of jagged stone, barely 10 feet wide at the narrowest possible pinch. His massive million-dollar machine was just too wide for the fast racing line. The corporate boss could clear it, but only at a crawl, a penalty he arrogantly accepted in his expensive master plan. But he never planned for the dedicated mechanic. That small, homemade garage build was 11 inches slimmer and 4 inches shorter. Built by a single father who walked this canyon at 9 a.m. one quiet February morning, mapping it with a cheap tape measure. We watched Wyatt blast out of that impossible gap, ripping onto the dirt 20 meters ahead of the stunned corporate boss. That overpriced corporate machine had to brake hard on entry. Inside Cameron's flawless, expensive cockpit, the radio went dead for several seconds. His paid engineer finally called his name. Cameron stayed completely silent. Picture this with me. The final 30 kilometers descend toward the city skyline. The jagged mountain rocks give way to hard, packed gravel, leading to a 2-lane asphalt road for the final 8 kilometers, pointing straight toward the finish. Our hand-built Underdog hit that open road holding a tight 3-second lead. Cameron's expensive horsepower closed that gap fast. That Vantech machine had massive straight-line speed, and its cooling system recovered after the brutal rocks. Just 4 kilometers left, and the corporate money-backed star was right behind. At the second-to-last turn, Cameron made a ruthless, desperate move, using the road's full width to force Wyatt off. It fit the letter of the rules, but everyone saw it as a desperate, cheap move. The exact kind of panic you get when money runs out of real talent. And when you decide that playing dirty is the only option left. Up at the fence, Isaac quietly raised his phone to capture everything on camera. Arya asked what was happening, but Isaac told her to just keep watching. Wyatt felt the massive pressure, but he refused to play their reckless game. He let the corporate machine steal the inside line, sacrificing his own momentum. Instead, he swept around the outside in a wider arc, losing only a fraction of a second, but saving the fragile mechanics of a home-built car redlining for over 170 kilometers. He launched out of that final turn, leading the race by 0.6 of a second. He crossed the line 17 seconds ahead of the factory car. Look closely, that victory was pure locked in by 4 official timing systems. Wyatt brought his handcrafted machine to a complete stop right in the official finish zone. He sat behind the wheel for a quiet moment, totally still. He pulled his helmet off, gripping it with exhausted hands against the worn steering wheel. He didn't look at anyone at all. He just stared through the dirty windshield at the flat, hot glare of the late afternoon sky. Finally, he unlatched his hand-built metal door and stepped out. An official let Arya through the gate. Isaac had distracted him just long enough for her dad to secure the win. She sprinted across the dirt staging yard, clutching gravel under one arm, and slammed into Wyatt. He caught his little girl, holding her tight against his sweat-stained, dusty racing suit. She cheered that he won. He laughed, telling her that gravel deserved the credit. She leaned back, studying the dented car, and then her dad, thinking it over. Then she smiled, deciding that both of them were true champions today. The trophy presentation was fast and simple, just the way local dirt track races go when the crew has run this same event for 11 straight years. Wyatt accepted his hard-earned trophy and prize check before a small crowd of dedicated fans. He gave quiet, highly technical details about his hand-built car, making sure to thank his friend Isaac. He didn't mention the corporate sponsor once, completely ignoring the defeated Cameron. He skipped the fancy exhibition hall, forgetting the wealthy elites who once laughed at him. From the edge of the track, Hannah quietly watched the podium ceremony. Her quick daily race report was already finished. Once things wrapped up, she opened a new file. The draft, asking the real question you and I have wanted to know: who actually designed this masterpiece? She ran the expose directly through her own media outlet. She attached Isaac's hard proof as a digital appendix. She never directly blamed anyone in the text of her article. She simply presented 2 documents, their dates, and their identical blueprints. Then she asked one heavy question in the final paragraph. Did the Phoenix Classic champion actually build his own winning engine design? Like any good journalist, she let the readers decide the truth. Cameron finished second, a brutal 16 seconds behind Wyatt's handmade race car. He hid in the corporate tent, completely avoiding the racing press. But the tech executive wasn't hiding in there. She waited out by the dusty staging lanes for his arrival. She waited for his high-priced crew to scatter before speaking. No media, no hype, just a quiet private talk. After that, Cameron got in his car, fled, and vanished. Giselle walked over to Wyatt, who stood beside the winning scrap build as Isaac loaded it onto their old, rusty trailer. She approached him alone, leaving her corporate entourage behind. No expensive assistants. No marketing teams or hype men to soften the blow. Wyatt held his ground as she approached, both of them silent. She stared at the hand-painted numbers on his custom scrap build. She studied the cheap green house paint rolled over raw metal, then faced the quiet mechanic who had just shocked everyone. She swore she had no idea about the stolen patent until 2 days ago. Wyatt studied her face for a quiet second, then told her he believed her. She explained that Cameron worked at her massive corporation. For 6 years, she blindly trusted his corporate reports without verifying them. You see, she completely owned it, admitting she failed to verify his work and offering no excuses for her oversight. She ended it there. She didn't dismiss this as a simple corporate mix-up, a paperwork glitch, or just a minor design overlap. Wyatt nodded. He understood completely. Knowing Cameron acted alone, and hearing her admit it, actually meant something. But he made it clear that apologies could never replace what was stolen, or the years spent in a cold garage, building a winner from scrap to prove his custom engine design worked. Giselle accepted the truth silently. She nodded slowly, allowing the heavy silence to linger between them. For the first time in 3 years, someone from that corporate giant faced him without any hidden agenda. No excuses or defensive arguments. No twisting the facts to make him settle for less than the truth. He did not forgive her. But he did not blame her for a crime Cameron committed all alone. He judged her with the same precision he used on his engines, deciding she spoke the absolute truth. Isaac glanced over from the rusty trailer, then quietly went back to securing their winning scrap car. Isaac was never known for being particularly subtle, but he knew exactly when to step back and give Wyatt some room. The winner's check was completely real, worth $5 million. You and I might have fainted, but Wyatt didn't lose his head over a massive sudden payday. I called the lawyer who handled the original lease on my quiet little shop and scheduled a quick meeting. I phoned the school, locking in my daughter Arya's enrollment for next year. That same evening, Isaac and I sat at the kitchen table. We quietly ran through the prize money math, speaking only in hard numbers. Once Isaac left, I just stood there in the quiet, staring at the kitchen counter. Finally, I took a drive down to the late-night ice cream stand. My daughter and I sat on the hood of my battered truck, quietly sharing our ice cream in the warm night air. Little Arya sat with Gravel in her lap. She rambled on, wondering if wild rabbits would actually enjoy eating ice cream cones. I listened closely, adding a few thoughts to a debate we never really settled. Picture this. 3 weeks after we shocked the racing world, my shop looked exactly the same. Every single wrench sat in its usual spot. The board still held those same messy abbreviations as I taught me way back during my very first year. Grace's photo still rested right on the workbench, right next to the computer. And our hand-built car itself, good old Gravel. The rusty green Underdog that somehow crossed the finish line first ahead of all those million-dollar teams. It just sat out in the yard, completely uncovered, resting under the sky in the exact dirt patch where I first built it. I really had no reason to hide our creation anymore. I never even bothered replacing those cheap bungee cords after the last rusty hook snapped. For weeks, I kept thinking about how to spend my share of that massive prize money. One dream always beat the rest, a community workshop, not some million-dollar corporate racing operation. No slick corporate branding with a rigid growth plan, just a simple, honest place. A workshop where folks with raw technical ideas but zero money could borrow decent tools, heavy machinery, and the backing of other underdogs working hard to build something real. I hadn't made any big announcements or filed official paperwork. I just quietly resolved to do it, which for me meant the choice was already final. Stick with me here. Giselle showed up Wednesday, driving herself this time. She dropped a single envelope on my messy workbench near Grace's photo, skipping the usual corporate small talk. She called it a formal offer to co-develop my scrappy team's thermal management technology. No corporate buyout, no cheap licensing deal. A true shared partnership with both our names and simple terms written in plain English by an outside lawyer completely disconnected from Vantech. She told me I didn't have to answer her today. I just stared back, not with the quick, calculating look of a guy sizing up a deal, but the deeper, quieter gaze of a builder measuring her character, ignoring all her past smug corporate talk. She stood her ground under my gaze, keeping her posture and expression completely still. And studying her under those harsh garage lights, I realized something. That she was actually someone I could stand in front of and look straight in the eye. So I simply offered her coffee. She glanced at the 2 mugs on my bench. Just like every morning, one sat by the dusty monitor, and the other rested quietly beside the photograph. She stared at those worn, homemade mugs a second longer than she really needed to. And when she finally looked up, you and I could see her expression shift in a tiny, undeniable way. You see, this was never about money or business. She simply said, yes. Arya stepped from the shadows, where she had been patiently sorting every single wrench by hand. She always did that, just wanting to stay near the work without ever getting in the way. She held her little toy, Gravel, looking right through the wealthy executive. It was that raw judgment only 5-year-olds deliver. She asked if this was the rich lady who laughed at her dad's handmade racer. The quiet builder started to speak, but Giselle stopped him. The humbled millionaire knelt down to the little girl's eye level, softly admitting she was deeply sorry. Arya measured those words carefully, processing the truth the way a patient kid handles big moments. Then she offered her worn toy, announcing that her rabbit was named Gravel. Named after her dad's car, because gravel is small and ignored, but it still flies incredibly far. The quiet executive took the small rabbit in both hands, studying it. Then she looked at the young girl, telling her it was a beautiful, brilliant name. And whoever thought of it had to be an absolute genius. Arya proudly declared that she thought of it herself. Giselle smiled, saying she figured as much. Wyatt walked to his old counter, pouring 2 cups of coffee brewed 20 minutes ago. Golden afternoon light cut through the dusty window of the old backyard garage, spilling across the grease-stained concrete floor in a long, quiet angle. He listened as Giselle asked a genuine question about her theory. Not some fake corporate small talk, and definitely not a question meant to just dismiss her, but a sincere question that valued exactly what the kid said, seeking the real story behind it. He heard his daughter reply with that deep, absolute certainty she only had for things she had believed in for years. The quiet builder did not even turn to look at them. He simply stood by the warm pot, absorbing the peace of the moment. He set one cup down near an old racing photo, bringing the second over to the oil-stained workbench where the executive sat, gently setting the warm mug right in front of her. Then he pulled up a worn metal stool sitting across from her. You and I know that silence, the kind people share when the massive wall of arrogant noise between them is finally gone. Chipped away by time, sheer effort, and raw honesty. Completely cleared away at last,